Hello, everyone. I'm back with Regine Gilbert, and so exciting. And we are talking about web accessibility. And I'd like to ask Regine this question: what is web accessibility, and how does it relates to customer experience?
Well, web accessibility specifically deals with making sure that your website, your mobile site, your apps, anything that people enter through the web is accessible for people with disabilities. In particular, you want to pay attention to visual, audio, cognitive, and mobility, right, issues. So you want to think about if someone is using a screen reader, or if somebody needs to make something larger. If you have a video, does the video have captions? Um, do you have things that are timed? Do you have things where you only need a mouse when certain people don't use a mouse? So these are all things that need to be taken into consideration when making a website or any sort of application accessible.
Very good. This is, I think that this is something that a lot of companies have been talking about, but not really bring forth some of the exciting things that is happening.
Right.
Would you want to share with us what you're seeing that is exciting and that you are really like would like to are working on or seeing people working on?
Sure. I mean, for me, what's exciting is I teach an assistive tech. I co-teach with Gus Chalkis a class called Looking Forward, where we teach students about assistive technologies that blind and low vision folks use. And so that to me is exciting, that we get to train the next generation of creators and have them think about how they could work with people with disabilities in creating, products with them, right? And not just making things for them. I think what's exciting to me now is seeing more people talk about accessibility and getting more involvement from the disability community into the design practice. It's still too small of a group, but my hope is that in the future we see more of co-designing and not just designing for people.
So we heard that you published a book, and would you like to share with us what the book is? I know that you have
Sure,
it with you
I
now.
do actually have it here.
Nice.
Shameful
Okay.
blood. My book is titled Inclusive Design for a Digital World, Designing with Accessibility in Mind.
Mm,
I wrote this book for people who are new to accessibility and don't really know much about it. In the book, I cover what accessibility is. I talk about the web content accessibility guidelines. I talk about planning for accessibility, recruitment, and the word inclusion has, it's a bit of a buzzword these days, and it's a hard word for people to define. Although
yeah,
my book has inclusion and
yeah,
the inclusive in the title,
yeah.
um, inclusion is really hard to define. One thing that I keep going back to, and I refer to it in my book, there's another book
Mm,
called Mismatch Design by Kat Holmes. And in that book, she states that it's hard for us to define inclusion, but we can define exclusion. We know what it's
interesting.
like to
Um,
be left out. And I like to take that perspective when I talk about accessibility, because we all do know what it feels like to be left out.
mm,
And so why would you do that? You know,
mm,
and so I take that look. So that's a little bit about the book, and it's very exciting. It came out late last year. It was a #1 new release. Technically, I am a bestseller. Once you're #1, you can say you're #1. So yeah, it was a bestseller. I've gotten good feedback on it from folks, and I feel really grateful that I had a lot of support in writing it, in the vein of Nothing About Us Without Us. My technical review of the book is a person named Sarah Allen. Sarah Allen is deaf. And so I made sure when I was writing the book that I had people who worked with me who had disabilities, as well as people who reviewed it, so that I wasn't creating this like, well, we need to do this for these people. You know, I didn't want to take that approach at all. I wanted to have as many voices as I could, incorporate as much as I could in terms of, you know, making sure that the story I tell in this book, and I hope people can use it as a reference, is going to be helpful for them.
Yeah, I always the first time when I look in at the word inclusion, right? And I was trying to figure it out what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and so and one of the things that I thought that it would be very neat is to have everybody in the world to be able to look at a web page or some information and understand like what that context is,
Right.
regardless of the language. But anyway, I think today I learned something from from you about this. How is it feel like being excluded when you can't join a conversation, cannot click on something because you don't understand or you do not know how to, what that content is about. Um, Thank you so much, Regine. All right. So I am so looking forward to having you talk more about web accessibility. So this is not the end of our conversation. Very honored to have you in our first expert in our podcast series, SymposiumX podcast series on web accessibility and customer experience. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you very much for having me. Grateful. Thank you.
bye.
Bye.
Mhm.